There are certain peculiarities about how Sufism has been understood in South Asia. Much of this has to do with understanding of the broader ideas of religion and debates on social reform in the late 19th and the long 20th century. For a significant period in post-colonial India, religion remained outside the domain of historians' investigation, a field that has been dominated by understanding of the state and its political economy. Thus, even while religion defined the complex political contour of the modern Indian state in multiple ways, it remained outside the purview of this secularity. In one of his early writings on culture and consciousness in modern India, Panikkar argues that, and I quote, "In contemporary India, religion as an ideology has embraced almost every sphere of existence, thereby masking the socio-economic and political reality. Therefore, if people are to be made to face the reality, the illusion that masks this reality is to be removed. Developing a critique of religion, therefore, becomes an immediate political task." Unquote. These perspectives continue to define even contemporary metaframes of historians' craft, as well as their understanding of religion, where the state and its mechanisms and the political economy maintain a central place. While seen as a way to de-emphasize religion, often with a moral commitment to secularism in India, this marginalization of everyday religious developments only strengthen Orientalist assumptions about some fundamental themes in Indian historiography, particularly in relation to Islam, Sufism, and medieval in Indian history, and in the context of Punjab, issues of invasion, conversions, and martyrdom. A. Azfar Moin argues how Akbar's religion and his association with Sufi saint mystics is commonly imagined as a precocious attempt at social engineering to harmonize the sacred traditions of his realm within the nationalist frames of thought that is based on anachronistic conceptions of religion and state. Karl Ernst has likewise argued that in the historiographies of Islam and India, polarized opinions can be found regarding all prominent figures of Indo-Islamic history, especially liberal Mughal Emperor Akbar, the conservative Naqshbandi Sufi saint Sheikh Ahmed Hindi, Dara Shikoh, a tolerant Mughal prince who could not become an emperor, and an intolerant Mughal ruler, Aurangzeb, whose religious views are variously categorized and judged from a modern perspective as secular, orthodox, fanatic, or apostate. Thus, as Niladri Bhattacharya argues, the recurring trope in Indian secular historiography has for long been preordained by constitutive assumptions of communal histories, despite the fact that they chose to invert the latter. Karl Ernst also underlines how limited Islamic imagery of the Sufi missionaries has been encouraged by modern Pakistani state to support the ideological interpretation of Islam as the basis for government. A competing political image is fostered in India too, where Sufis are depicted as tolerant universalists and secularists only tangentially related to Islam. This continued entanglement of state and religion continue to define and inform both political and academic discourses. Niladri also laments the lack of scholarly attention to popular tracts that very often shape people's conceptions of the past. Thus, it is important to ground the intellectual history of sacrality firmly in social reality and pay close attention to the relationship between social structure and the persistence of particular type of cosmologies within which Sufi traditions and rituals function. We now know how during the dictatorship of successive military generals in Pakistan, attempts were made to purge music, Sufi traditions, language and literature of alleged Hindu influences. Similar is true for the significant Sanatani push to undermine the heterogeneity of tradition bracketed under Hinduism. The fundamental ways in which Sufi traditions transformed in South Asia since the early 20th century led French anthropologist Marc Guéverou to wonder what is left of Sufism in Tablighi Jamaat. He argues that though the founders of Jamaat had Sufi antecedents, Sufi aspects are residual in this movement today. It becomes crucial to ask and lay down the process through which these reform movements gained significant semblance and undermined Sufi tradition, which was once the dominant strain of Islam in South Asia. Scholars of reform movements underline the textualization of religion as one significant process through which tradition, which had a revelatory sacred text, harked back on its relevance, and those which didn't have one invented it. In both these processes, the ritual practices associated with shrine traditions like pilgrimage, veneration of saint tombs, sama, dhamal, consumption of cannabis, etc., were targeted. It is significant to underline that in most debates on Sufi shrines, it is the ritual practice which was often targeted and not necessarily Sufi poetry or saint hagiographies. Academic debates, particularly among historians, have strangely mimicked the reformist perspective of sacred shrines by foregrounding sacred texts and accordingly categorize ritual practices at saint shrines as rightful or deviant. The sheer volume of these debates in the 19th and 20th century, a period that coincides with the experience of colonialism in South Asia, is so vast and overwhelming that it becomes difficult to perceive whether the pre-colonial experience could have been different. We have become so used to dominant idioms and categories around religious identities that even a slight variation is perceived as deviant. Harjot Oberoi remarks that the historiography of religious experience in the 19th century, rituals and quotidian practices that constituted the traditions, is based on two principles, one of absence and the other of negation. Like the Europeans, religious reformers began a journey in search of authentic text so that the correct articles of faith could be established. Much like the European scholars or late 19th century reformers, contemporary scholarship either tends to ignore vast terrain of religious life in the 19th century or views it as a superfluous addition that has to be ignored. Thus, official Sikh historiography, for instance, completely undermines the role that Nath and Sufi traditions play in shaping Sikh beliefs and practices and vice versa. Therefore, to a tutored eye today and in the larger academic world of historians in the 20th century, religion, which has mostly been defined as an extension of sacred texts, isn't necessarily seen in flux. At the base level, religion is considered to have a core, and what appears on the surface are its varied manifestations, ranging from radicalism to tolerance. On the contrary, change in ritual tradition fundamentally transforms religion. Rituals provide meaning to religious traditions. They are like signposts, a language of codes and idioms through which they communicate with everyday life. What needs to be understood is that while shrines are imbued with the charisma of the founder saint, therefore embodied with the founding moment, yet shrines are also informed by streams of pilgrims who visit and frequent its spaces. These pilgrims come from a diverse range of formal religious affiliations. Study of shrines departs from the dominant discourse on religion in Punjab, while treats shrine as an extension of textual discourses and, therefore, in any episode of perceived deviation requires course correction. Shrines that deviate from this kind of disciplining are at best considered as anomalies in modern religious ideas of territoriality and governmentality. Thus, shrine visitation is a complex process which is not necessarily guided by the formal religious affiliations. Is it therefore possible to think of Sufi shrines as not mere embodiment and illustrative of textual norms, but a far more complex arena of overlapping sacrality, a domain of liminality? Punjab has been the earliest center in northern hemisphere of medieval India to receive Islam and its repository of Sufi shrines and practices, but also provided a fertile ground for the emergence of Sikh Panth. Both these traditions had strong critical engagement with existing monotheistic Nath practices, yet continuously redefined notions of sacred and rituals of piety. It is this discursive dialectic of religious practices in Punjab that make the study of religion through the lens of sacred shrines a fascinating subject of investigation.